Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. I'm a quilt shop owner, and so I'm going to cover all of the things that every quilter needs to know and wants to know. I'm going to tell you how to buy fabric, how much fabric to buy, how to store your fabric, and most importantly, how to sew from your stash and use that up. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington State for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My two sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. Okay, so the first thing is I want to talk about how to buy fabric and kind of how much you should buy. So a lot of it depends. Some people just buy fabric because they think it's beautiful. That's why I take it home. I just think it's beautiful and I want to have it for a future project. For me personally, I never go away with at least a half a yard of everything in the collection. So if there is something and I think all of it's beautiful, I don't know yet what I'm going to do with it, I want to make sure A, that I have enough to make something with, and B, that I have enough of a smattering of color. So that's usually what I do. Another option is you can just get a fat quarter bundle. A fat quarter is a half of a yard cut in half. So your piece of fabric is 18 inches by 22 inches. That's great because you get all of the colors, but you have to make sure you have enough to complete a quilt. And we're going to talk about quilt sizes in just a second. So if it's a collection that you love, I would say at least a half yard of everything in the collection. If it's something that's kind of a tone on tone, something that you would think of as a basic color, a solid white, a solid black, maybe you use a lot of blue or a lot of purple, I buy that 3 yards at a time because I never want to run out halfway through a quilt or wish that I had just a little piece of extra black or a little extra piece of white. Also, you think about background colors. If you're getting some tone on tone whites or some tone on tone beiges, if you think you're going to use that as a background in a queen size quilt, almost all of our patterns require 3 yards of fabric for a background. So think about that. Also borders. If you're getting a border print, what happens with a good border print is it runs lengthwise so that you can miter your corners. Even if you're doing just a baby quilt, you need a minimum of 1.5 yards. Usually for a border print, I will get 3 yards just to make sure if I want to make like a full crib size quilt or something for a big girl bed, I'll go ahead and have enough to be able to go all the way around because you're going to need an extra 10 inches for every corner. So you have to make sure and do all of that math correctly. If it's an unusual piece and you just think it's kind of cool and you don't ever know what you're going to do with it, I would say get at least 1 yard so that you have some options for what you want to do with it. And finally, if the piece is on sale, I get 6 yards. 6 yards is going to give you enough backing for a quilt that's going to end up to be 80 by 108. If you have a king size quilt or king size bed that you end up making, then I would say you probably need 8 yards. Or if you love it, love it, love it, and you could use it in a quilt and on a border, I still would get 6 yards if it's on sale. Because if it's on sale, that means you're not going to get it again. And if you love it, it's a great price, I would stock up on that. Okay, so let's talk about how much fabric you need for a quilt. As a basic rule, if you are making a lap size quilt, you need about 3.5 to 4 yards. For a twin size quilt, you need about 6 yards. For a queen size quilt, I would say 8 to 9. And for a king size quilt, you could need 12 to 14 yards. Now that is a basic rule of thumb. A lot of it depends on your piecing. If you're doing a whole bunch of big pieces and you don't have a lot of little seams, your fabric will go a long way. But still, if it's 3.5 yards, even if you lay it out, it's only going to be so big. So a lot of it depends on how much cutting, how many seams, how many little pieces you're cutting. But as a general rule, that's a pretty good indicator. This is a charm pack. They're called different things from different companies, but Moda calls them charm packs, and they're 5-inch squares, perfectly cut for you. There's 42 in here. If you sew these together, 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. When you've sewn these together, you're still only going to end up with something that's about 28 by 32, roughly. So you're going to have to put borders on it no matter what. I mean, this is how much fabric you have, and so that's what you're going to end up with. Same thing with a layer cake. And again, different companies do it, 10-inch squares. It's fantastic. It's all pre-cut for you. You get 42 in here. There's always a little sheet on the back that shows different opportunities for cutting it up. But even this is 3.5 yards of fabric roughly. And so when you sew this together end to end to end, and you've got 6 rows across by 7 rows down, you're still ending up with a quilt that's about 55 by 65, roughly, 1/4 inch seam allowance. So again, people will say, well, I got a layer cake, but I want it to be a queen size quilt. It's not going to be a queen size quilt unless you add more fabric. You can get 2 layer cakes, sew them together. You absolutely will have a queen. Or you can add borders. Same thing with a jelly roll. A jelly roll is 2.5-inch strips. There's 42 in here, and again, they're called different things. Pixie rolls, called different things from Bolly Pops are the batik version of them. But again, 3.5 yards of fabric. So if you're going to do a jelly roll race, then what will happen is when you sew these all end to end to end, you're still going to end up with about a 55 by 60-inch quilt. So you either need 2 jelly rolls, or again, you need some other border options. We have a couple of reference tools that we suggest. This one is really good. It's just no math quilt charts and formulas, and so it has all kinds of information: the size of a quilt, the size of a bed, how to figure out borders, how to figure out how much fabric you need if you're doing 10-inch squares and you want it to be king size. It's kind of nice. It's like $6.95. It's a decent book to have. This one has just a little bit more information, a lot of different tutorials about how to even do the blocks, and again, lots of information about side setting and sizes of quilts and what you need to be able to finish your quilt. And this one is like $13, and it shows you even some cutting basics. So the other thing that we really recommend is a really nice reference tool. Okay, so we went ahead and came out here to my sewing studio so I can talk with you a little bit about storage and how to maintain your stash, because of course, if you have it organized properly, it will be way easier for you to use all of that stash and actually shop from your stash. So first of all, not everybody has a designated space, and I certainly understand that. In fact, when I first started quilting, I had a dresser. And it was a fairly large dresser, but I kept my sewing machine covered and it was stored on the top. My top drawer had all of my notions in it, and then the fabric was stored in the drawers beneath it. As I ended up having more and more fabric, I would put them in totes, and those totes would slide under my bed because my children were small. So after they went to bed, I would get my sewing machine out on the dining room table, get my project out, sew and do whatever I could do, and then I always had it put away before I got up, before I went to bed and before they got up in the morning. So that was not easy, but it did help me to stay organized because I had a smaller space. But even if you have a large space, I know some women have garages, extra bedrooms, huge sewing studios. If it's organized properly, you're going to find that it's far more useful, because sometimes having more space doesn't necessarily mean more organization. So I store fabric in, I think I store 6 different types of fabric. I store backings, and normally what I do with backings, I sometimes have extra backings if it's a really good deal, or again, if there's yardage that's on sale, I might just want to get 8 yards of it because it's a fabric that I love and it kind of goes with my aesthetic. But once I get a quilt done, I always do the binding, so I have that ready to go, and I have my backing, and I store these together. But I have a separate room for that because I happen to have a long arm room, which works nice, but I store all of those together, and that includes my extra backings. I also store yardage, so anything that is at least a yard or more, and I store those organized by color and type of fabric. I also keep fat quarters in a specific spot, and I keep collection bundles of fat quarters where everything is the same collection, and I also have individual fat quarters that I've kept that are organized by color. I also store my fun bits, and I'll show you what those are in a few minutes. I also have bins for current projects. So it might be either a class that we're planning or a quilt that I'm working on. It's always nice when I have empty bins. That means I can start a few more projects. But it's nice because then everything is stored together. I have all of the fabrics that I've selected for that project. I have the pattern or the book that's included in there. And whenever I want to pull that out and work on it, I just have to grab one bin and I can quickly clean it up and put everything back in there and put it away. And finally, I store pre-cuts. And I store the pre-cuts by collection pre-cuts in layer cakes, jelly rolls, and 5-inch squares. And I also store what I call my stash cuts. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Let's start from when you bring your fabric home. When you bring your fabric home, or when you're working on a project and you have those leftover things, what happens is we end up with this weird stack of stuff. So that's what I want to talk about first, because that's kind of where it really begins. For me, I happen to have this great big huge basket. It's a big basket and it's gotten bigger over the years, but it's also gotten smaller, that this is the maximum size allowable before I have to spend an afternoon or an evening going through it. So the stuff that's in here are things that if I have leftover bits from something that I was making and I have not yet put it away, because it's true that I don't stop immediately, put everything back away, but I do want a clean work area. So I'll throw that in there. Fabric that was left over, I finished the quilt and this was the piece that was left, or something that I brought home from work because I felt that I needed to have it. So I throw them in there until I have a minute to put everything away. So let's talk first about the large pieces of fabric. So the large pieces of fabric, I store them very specifically. So this one, this looks like this was probably something left over from a project, and it looks like it's about 1.5 yards, maybe 2 yards. And you can see that we are salvage to salvage. This is how you'll get it when you get it from this shop. This is just my 6x24 ruler. It's the first ruler everybody should buy. Everybody should have that. So what I do is I'm just going to roll it. So I'm going to wrap it on here, pull out my ruler, and fold it. Once I've done that, I can see exactly what fabric it is. It's the same size, and I've folded everything that way. And since we're folding everything that way, here's another one. Oh, this one might be an extra wide. Oh no, it isn't. This is a piece that is sewn together. That's all right. I'm going to do the same thing, because then, and just so you don't have this funny little thing, just fold that in, fold that over, and then again, you can see that everything is just going to sit nice and tidy, because then when you go to store it, what I end up doing is I store them. Let's go ahead. So you can see that whether it's white on whites, tone on tones, things for background colors, I do like black and gray. I have some wild floral stuff. This is my kind of wilderness kind of stuff. Over here I've got yellows, orange, reds, blues, massive floral, massive green, and then I have it organized by batik in color, and then I have my stash of Kaif, stash of tulip pink, and then I have other like seasonal stuff. So I have Christmas, I have dog and cat, I have Halloween, 30s, kids fabrics, those sorts of things. So again, if you don't have a space like that that is reasonable to store all of it, you can store it other ways. I don't know that anybody needs that much fabric, but I have owned a quilt shop for 21 years, so I have a fabric addiction. I do make a lot of quilts though, so I do have quilts to show for it. If you've decided instead that you want to store it in a tub, I did use tubs for probably 5 years. What I know about me and tubs is that if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and I don't use it. So my only tubs, what I use tubs for, and I have got, there must be probably 20 tubs, and I have them organized by color. So I've gone down to just this small tub, and this is probably it's probably a 9 by 12 tub, and I am limited to this much of this color. So once this is full, it's time to pull this tub out and make some decisions about making a quilt with it, giving a bunch of it to Eliza, donating it, whatever it is I want to do with it. So what's in here is a piece that is, I think, too beautiful to throw away. It's not a fat quarter. I, for some reason, haven't cut it into 5-inch squares, and there isn't any other place to put it, so I put it in here. So a piece like this, I would have to decide, do I want to put this in my pink tin or pink tub, or do I want to cut this up? What happens is, again, if my tub is already full, I either have to take something out to put something in or do something else with it. So I have these. The thing that you want to know about these is that tubs, whether you have large tubs and that's where you're storing your fabric, or smaller tubs and you're storing smaller bits, you do want to put a desiccant in there. So these are just, you know, they come in every shoebox, they come in all kinds of things. What it's for is it'll absorb moisture and odors, because after a while it might kind of have a funny smell in there. So just make sure that you have one of those, at least one of those in each one, and it makes kind of a big difference. So anyway, so tubs, make sure they're labeled. The other thing too that I found is when I had the great big tubs that were under my my bed, they were too heavy for me to pull out, dig through. I might find that I was shopping through my tubs for hours before I didn't find what I was looking for. So then it was easier just to go buy something. So again, if you fold it so that you can see what you have, you know in a second that you want to pull out some browns, some blacks, some reds, whatever it is that you're looking for, and you can see at a glance what you have. All right, so tubs, large pieces. The other thing is, if it is a fat quarter, I'm a little bit, I'm overrun at the moment with fat quarters. So again, the fat quarters that I keep and even that I purchase are unusual ones. If it's a print that I think is really cool, if it is something that's very unique, a unique novelty piece, then I might keep it up there. The other thing is fabrics that I use all the time. I like a lot of gray, black, white, cream, so I have a lot of that, and I like bright stuff, so I'll keep those. But I find that I also like the collections of fat quarters. My problem with the collections is that I think they're so pretty, I seldom cut them up into something, so it becomes more of a collector and decoration than actually usable fabric. But at the moment I have the space for it, so it seems okay. The other thing that I do with fabric, and what I'll probably end up doing with these, is that what happens is, again, when I have realized that it's time to go through my tub, I'll find all of the pieces that are in there. And if you saw our video about a shape cut, that's what I do. Is I take these, so like this one is width of fabric. So what that means is that I have 42 inches. I have a salvage to salvage piece. So if I have salvage to salvage, I am going to go ahead and lay this out. I'm going to put this one out. I'll take this one as another one that's salvage to salvage, and I'm going to lay this one out. I'm going to put my shape cut on top of it, and I'm going to cut 2.5-inch strips. I'm going to dig through all of those that are that and cut all of them, throw away the leftover bits, and store my 2.5-inch pieces. Pieces like this, I'm going to cut into 5 inches. I'm not going to store this in my little pink bin. I feel like I can see this color and this style of fabric all day long. I'm going to add it to my 5-inch bin. I might only get one, and as much as there's going to be a lot of audible gasps, I would throw the rest of it away. I used to keep small little bits when Brianna was little because she would sew little bits together. I would also keep them for paper piecing, but again, we never used it. We didn't dig through that basket. Sometimes looking through that basket for a small little 2-inch piece of pink was just kind of silly. So we just don't keep it anymore. What I cut is 2.5-inch strips, 5-inch squares, and I also cut 10-inch squares because I have a lot of patterns and Brianna has a lot of patterns that use those fabrics, those cuts, and there's a lot of pattern designers that write for those specific cuts. Some examples are things like the jelly roll race, super, super fun, or the rug, the jelly roll rug. I think that's called a raggedy rug. We didn't call it a jelly roll rug, did we? Super nice. And so what'll happen is, and again, I don't have a big bin of them because what happens is this one was recently organized. And so if you find things that kind of go together, they might be leftovers from a jelly roll and I didn't use all of them, or they might be from a quilt that I used up, so they kind of all go together. So I'll just sort of wrap them up. There might not be very many here, but I have enough that these all kind of go together, and maybe these kind of go with these, and maybe these go with these. And so when it comes time to make something and you want to make a jelly roll race, or you have somebody coming over and they want to sew something, you can pull out this tub that's all cut up, have them dig through a little bit, organize something, and you already have a pre-cut kit ready to go because you can just pull from these. And again, these were just leftover bits that I wasn't going to know how to store. Threw them in my basket, and as I cut them up, you can fill up a basket super quick. You have to decide how big of a basket you want for that. So I have this one. We recently went through, I actually have a different basket full of the 5-inch squares because it's a little overwhelming and we're kind of going through it at the moment, so it's sort of in a different spot. But same thing with the 5-inch squares. Eliza uses these a lot. They're kind of fun for her, even just for playing with. If you have a little person who's in your sewing room, it's fun for them to design their own quilt with the 5-inch squares. A long time ago, I used to also save 2.5-inch squares. I found that those were just a little bit too much. They grow quickly, and I find if I do have a pattern that I'm doing, like the dumpster diving out of 2.5-inch squares, I just go ahead and grab some jelly rolls and I cut those up. And then of course the other one is the 10-inch squares, and I find the reason that I have a bigger basket for that is because this is mostly what I do. I find that the quilts that are kind of my go-to quilts that I make most often actually come from a 10-inch square and a 2.5-inch strip. So this one is bigger, and so I might have, so these were some recent ones that I just cut up from a quilt that I had made, so I just kind of kept those together. This is another one from something, so these all go together. So again, these were just leftovers that were little bits from other stuff. Cut them into 10-inch squares, and you have enough to at least get started. You can count these, see how many you have, pull something from something else if you need a border or if you need more 10-inch squares, and cut those up. So this whole thing is full of lots and lots of 10-inch squares. And again, this is much more fun to go through if I decide I want to make a quilt and I've picked out a pattern like, I don't know, Stacks, size 9 shoe, or Tri-Dazzle. All of those are great, and instead of going through yardage, you can just go through your tub and go ahead and pick out the number that you want. Because again, with all of those quilts, the number of blocks that you choose, you can decide if you're going to make a small one or a large one, and a lot of it will depend on what you have. All right, so let's see. Bring home your fabric. And again, as you organize it, if you have it well organized, it'll be really, really easy for you to pull from that to be able to start and finish your creations. Because what you don't want is you don't want them to turn into pigs, and you know what those are? Projects in grocery sacks. You don't want them to be Nessies. Nessies are not even started yet. And of course, What's always nice is that we always, when I look at my stash, I see whims, and whims are works hidden in my mind. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it will help you to think about how to purchase your fabric, how to store your fabric, and most importantly, really, how to sew from your stash. Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.